computer. All right. Make sure this is recording. All right, can everyone see my screen? Awesome. All right. All right, so again, eccentrics, a foundation for performance and injury prevention. So eccentrics is something that I'm very passionate about. It's really my, I'm a triphasic type guy, and I was actually a triphasic type guy before I even knew what triphasic was. I was always in the eccentrics back in the day as a, middle school and stuff. We just called it negatives back then. And so it's something I'm very passionate about. It's really the foundation of everything we do here at Manchester University within our football program and how we train. I stress these phases when we get there. So, so what is eccentric? It's the foundation on which the house sits on. So you can see this house right here. It's set on a bad foundation. As you know, when you get a house with a bad foundation, what happens? Issues, all right? Things start to fall apart. For the athlete, those are acute and chronic injuries, all right? And so we always wonder what happens. Well, what would happen if the unstoppable force met the immovable object? All right, which one's going to win? All right, well, that's what these videos are for. So as I adjust the screen share, it might take a second. All right. Can you all see that? All right, so this is a tornado. I don't know if you can hear it, but those are tornadoes going through the Caribbean. As you can see, it just uprooted some of these trees, knocked them down. All right, as it transitions, now here's the house, the immovable object. Obviously, the tornado would be the unstoppable force. Just completely blows it off, just rips it apart, rips off the roof. So again, if you can't control the force getting placed upon the body, damage is done, all right? So if that roof, if those trees were able to withstand that force, they would still be upright, okay? And for the athlete, again, if they could withstand the force getting placed upon the body, all right, now you get to reduce that injury risk. All right, so I asked, what is eccentric? All right, well, eccentric is a muscle contraction, all right? It's the lowering phase of any resistance exercise, all right? The muscle lengthens because the contractile force is less than the resistive force. It's also time under tension, all right? So we're stressing our muscles for a longer period of time than what they're typically used to. 3 seconds, 4 seconds, 5, 6, 7 seconds, or even some people may even go 8 seconds, all right? But the key point and really philosophy and theme of this whole presentation is it's the absorption of force. The absorption of force. We want to be able to absorb maximum amount of force. All right, so again, we talked about that immovable object and the unstoppable force. So we got another video here. All right, now this is when I tried it with my athletes that they said they couldn't hear the volume. So if you can't hear the volume, again, you could watch it. It's linked to in that email that I sent you. Otherwise, I'll just explain it as it goes through anyway, and you actually might hear it through my presentation. So we got an F4 Phantom jet here. So it's F4 Phantom jet going 500 miles per hour. So what was happening is the U.S. government wanted to test what would happen if a plane crashed into the walls of a nuclear power plant that were protecting it. And so They used an F4 Phantom jet. It went 500 miles per hour. I would say, a jet going 500 miles per hour is an unstoppable force. All right. Well, they slammed into the wall. The jet just completely got destroyed. And it says here, the wall that was designed to move and absorb energy did its job well. The wall that was designed to move and absorb energy did its job well. The wall upheld. The plane was completely destroyed, but the tips of the wings. And so, as I showed you, that first house with a poor foundation and all the issues were happening with it. Here's a house with a solid, strong foundation, which would be more of a healthy athlete that is on the field, that is competing, that is not getting those chronic and acute injuries, and because they could absorb the forces getting placed upon the body. So if you could absorb the force being placed upon the body, it can be redirected. All right. If you could absorb that force, it could be redirected. All right. So a little bit about the physiology with some eccentric training. So eccentric training can affect two physiological processes that contribute to force development, and that's the stretch reflex and the stretch shortening cycle. All right. So stretch reflex is the body's just natural response to a stimulus getting placed upon it. So we have with the stretch reflex, you got the muscle spindles, which are going to initiate movement, neuromuscular stimulators, and you got your Golgi tendon organs, which are going to inhibit movement, emergency cutoff switch, and we'll get into that here on this next slide a little bit more. But then you also have that stretch shortening cycle. Again, we've got the eccentric, atomization, and concentric phases. As you notice with that stretch shortening cycle, and why eccentrics are so important is there is no stretch shortening cycle without the eccentric. All right, so you want to make sure you're training that absorption of force, and if I can absorb that force, I can redirect it. So here with the stretch shortening cycle, again, we want to train the muscle spindles and we want to train the GTOs. So those muscle spindles, again, they're going to measure changes in muscle length and the rate of change, and it's going to indicate how hard we must contract to overcome that force to get placed upon us. So those signals get sent to and from the body. Those afferent and efferent neural pathways. We want to train that and have a strong, smooth, uninterrupted signal. All right, and so we want to ideally train with high forces with eccentric training, and I'll break that down a little bit more as we go out through the presentation with super maximals and other percentages as well. But then again with the GTOs, they're going to measure changes of force being placed upon the muscle. So if continued tension were to cause injury, what's going to happen? They're going to inhibit a relaxation more as a safety mechanism. So what we want to do as we train this is the goal is to desensitize those, to keep the GTOs from actually firing, so we can train higher and higher forces, so we get a good, strong, powerful contraction to the muscle spindles and that stretch reflex. And then again with that, skip the slide. Again, with the stretch shortening cycle, the more force I can absorb, the potential for greater contraction, all right? So that's why we want to train with high forces, ideally. You get your best bang for your buck with high forces with eccentric training. So here, eccentric training with injury prevention, which is really the key for eccentric training again. So what happens if if you can't control the forces getting placed upon the body? Injury, all right? Acute or chronic injuries, hamstring strains, torn tendons, stuff like that. So there were two studies I want to kind of talk about here. The first one, now this was overseas with minor league soccer players. So 942 soccer players, they split into two groups. So you have one group of 461, one group of 481. One group implemented eccentric training. The other group did not implement any eccentric training, all right? So it was the group that implemented eccentric training was a 10-week progressive training cycle. And all they did was they implemented one exercise, all right? The Nordic hamstring exercise. That's the only eccentric exercise they implemented into their training. And it was progressive. So, like one set of 8, and then eventually they progressed to a little bit more reps, and then 2 sets, and eventually by the end was doing 3 sets. So the other group just did the normal training that they do every year. And at the end of the week, that 10 weeks, what they found was the group that did not do eccentric training had 52 injuries, all right? And they categorized an injury based off the posterior thigh region. 52 injuries, 32 new, 20 reoccurrent. And we know those hamstring injuries, they like to linger, they like to reoccurrent, that happens a lot. That group that actually did eccentric training, they had 15 injuries, all right? 12 new, 3 reoccurrent. All right, so I've never been any good in math, all right? But, you know, I can count my weights, I can count my money, and I know there's a difference between 52 and 15 injuries, all right? There's a big difference between keeping your athletes healthy, keeping them on the field, keeping your starters, your better players on the field competing. There's a big difference between 32 and 12, 20 and 3, all right? This was just implementing a one exercise, the Nordic hamstring exercise, all right? This next study, now this was done on Achilles tendinosis. Now this was a smaller study. The groups weren't as big. As you see, it was only 30 individuals, not 400. And these were just recreational runners, all right? So these weren't competitive athletes. These were just recreational runners, all right? So they had 2 groups of 15, and this was after 12 weeks. They all had, again, Achilles tendinosis injuries. So after 12 weeks of rehabbing and implementing eccentrically, for one group, what they found was the group that trained eccentrically had decreased pain, all right? There was no significant difference in contralateral limbs when it came to concentric and eccentric plantar flexion. They returned to their injury, pre-injury activity levels, and they made a full recovery in 3 months, all right? In 3 months, and that's gonna be big here. The group that did not do any eccentrically training, and what happened with them is they did have decreased pain, so that's good. They just went to the typical physical therapist and all that jazz, rehab. They had decreased pain, so that's awesome. Unfortunately, they still had a significant difference in eccentric and concentric plantar flexion between limbs, and then they had to have surgery. Even though they went through rehab and physical therapy, they still had to have surgery, and it took them 6 months to fully recover, all right? The group that trained eccentrically, all they did was they implemented eccentric calf raises on a stairway. They did straight leg and bent knee calf raises. And so you have one group that implemented eccentrics. So you had one group that implemented eccentrics, was able to recover in half the time, and a key did not need surgery, all right? Obviously, we know if we could do rehab and get our athletes to return to full activity without surgery, hey, I'll take that over having surgery any day, all right? And then they recovered in half the time. Oh, thought I went to the next slide. All right, so benefits of eccentric training. Again, the key is the maximum absorption of force. As we know, as we're running, as we're jumping, as we're sprinting, as we're taking on contact or delivering a blow or whatever it is that we're doing within the on the field or on the court, there's high amounts of force getting generated and transferred throughout the body. If I can't handle that force, something's going to snap, something's going to give eventually, all right? So maximum absorption of force. And then you also have greater force production through an improved stretch shortening cycle and stretch reflex, all right? Due to that maximum absorption of force with that stretch shortening cycle, all right? Enhanced acceleration and deceleration technique. So again, eccentric training, that's all it is. It's all deceleration, all right? And then again, that enhanced acceleration, because again, now you have that improved stretch shortening cycles, improved stretch reflex, and then if you kind of scroll to the bottom there is eccentrics, they selectively train. They're going to recruit those type 2 muscle fibers, all right? And we'll get into that in a little bit more. Improved tissue tolerance, movement efficiency. So I was reading a study and it talked about the improved tissue tolerance, and the researchers saw that there was more tendon stiffness as they were training eccentrically, and they're like, oh man, okay, we expect to see an increased injury due to this tendon stiffness, and actually there wasn't any increased injury, and so what they thought would happen was that that increased tendon stiffness actually just led to more joint stability. All right, so it actually didn't lead to increased injury as they thought it would. Again, as I mentioned, selectively training those type 2 muscle fibers. You know, I don't know many strength coaches or any strength coaches that would say, you know, I don't want more explosive athletes. You know, I don't want to train those type 2 muscle fibers. I don't want an increased stretch reflex or stretch shortening cycle. You know, all those 3 things are going to contribute to power production and more explosive athletes. So with eccentrically, you know, you get to flip it upside down and train those type 2 muscle fibers. If I go in and do a bench press right now, if I go do a pull or a push up or a squat or whatever it is, you know, the body's only going to select the muscle fibers and recruit those muscle fibers needed to get the job done. All right. If it doesn't need to touch those type 2 fibers, type X, 2X fibers is not going to touch them. But eccentrically, when you train eccentrically, it flips that around and actually recruits those first. So a bigger bang for your buck as well right there. And then again, hypertrophy. All right, so you can get your hypertrophy through time under tension, because typically with eccentrics, you're not going to do as much volume as far as reps wise. You make up that volume through that time under tension. And we'll break that down a little bit more in 3 seconds, 6 seconds, and stuff like that. But if I'm doing a set of 8 just concentrically compared to a set of 3 with a 3-second eccentric emphasis, you know, it's going to take me a lot longer to do those three reps with a 6-second eccentric, 18 seconds, compared to if I just did down up concentrically, you know, 8 reps. So. All right, so we got a couple more of these videos, and these next 2, again, they're just like the other ones. They're kind of a little off, but I'll explain how it ties into essentially eccentrics. All right, the first one is going to take a few seconds to get into it. But this is a clip from Avengers: Infinity War, which is my favorite movie of all time. All right, so coming right here, Iron Man shoots all these missiles on top of Thanos, all that force getting placed upon him, but he's able to absorb it and explosively redirect it. So maximum absorption of force, and then we want to be able to explosively redirect that force. This next video, this one kind of starts fast, but at the bottom, it will actually say some words which are actually, it was fitting that I could find this video because I was like, perfect, that actually fits into this because those are all benefits of eccentric training as well. So he has a grenade in his hand, it explodes. As you see at the bottom, kinetic energy absorption. We wanted to be able to explosively redirect that force. Got someone shooting bullets at him. Enhanced strength, that's another benefit of eccentric training. All right, now more people start to shoot bullets. Someone fires a rocket launcher on him, but his body's designed to move and absorb force. He absorbs the force. And what do we want to do? We want to explosively redirect that. Use that improved stretch shortening cycle, use that improved stretch reflex and those type 2 muscle fibers that you've been training. And this last one right here, Again, you got one athlete who delivers a high amount of force on top of another one, but this athlete's been training eccentrically. He's able to absorb that force. He's able to explosively redirect that force here to another athlete who hasn't been training eccentrically, who's not able to absorb that high amount of force. And as we said, if you can't absorb that force, what happens? Damage is done. All right, so here we got general guidelines prior to implementing eccentric training. These are important. You want to incorporate a general prep phase prior to starting eccentrics. The reason for that is, again, eccentrics are going to cause a high amount of stress upon the body, especially if it's an athlete who hasn't been training, who has a low training age, who's never done eccentrics in a while, who's coming off a long break, Christmas break, summer or something like that. I know here at the Division III level, we'll train football, to the end of the season, which is mid-November, but I'll have some guys who I won't see again until literally spring practice, which starts in April. So I'll go 4.5 months with some kids I've never seen because it's all voluntary at our level. So, some kids decide not to show up. The last thing I would want to do is start eccentric phase with those kids because it physically might just, it'd be too taxing and be too much for them, too much stress. All right. So you want to make sure you start a general prep phase prior to starting eccentrics. And again, do that high amount of stress so you don't kill their bodies. It's best to just stick to the compound exercises, your main exercises, again, the squat, the bench, stuff like that, your deadlifts. Do that first, and then as they experience and they get more training experience, their bodies start to adapt more and more to eccentrics, then you could get more into incorporating into all the exercises that you do. Now, we train eccentrically year-round, so I'm not afraid to implement those eccentrics into those auxiliary lifts that we do as well with our guys, just because, if they're doing their packets, then they've been training eccentrically throughout the entire year. And I'll get into how we implement it and train it throughout the entire year here on the next couple of slides. But be cautious when you're doing eccentrics with high loads. Again, when you get the loads above 85%, it's just a risk reward. Now you could train essentially at well above 100%. Again, that the super maximals, 120%, 125%. I saw one study that said 130%. But is that risk reward? There's a big reward when you're training with those high intensities, man. Oh yeah, maximum absorption of force, love it. But again, you gotta remember, last thing you want is to tear a pec. It's for someone, to tear a tendon or anything like that. So you just gotta be cautious when you do that. So it's just what works for you, and then always have a spotter, even with low loads. The reason for that is you got to remember that time under tension. You never know when the body's going to give out. All right, let's say you're doing 4 sets of 3. It could give out on the second set on rep 2. You just don't know, because sometimes whether you're doing 3-second eccentric or 6-second eccentrics, you just never know. Especially if you're doing more and more sets, you just never know. So be locked in, have the spotter locked in, make sure the lifter's communicating as well. Obviously, they know their body a little bit more compared to the spotter and anyone else. So just communicate and always have a spot. And then, as I said earlier, again, always follow that eccentric phase with an explosive concentric contraction, all right? You're training those type 2s, that stretch reflex, that stretch shortening cycle, all right? Now let's put it to good use. Not this training cycle, but last spring, we finished our general prep phase and we're now into our 3rd week of eccentrics. So this is really like week 6 or 7 of training. And I had one athlete who hadn't been showing up the first 2 weeks, all right? He shows up for that last week, that third week of eccentrics, first time he shows up, and we're doing dumbbell row, and he's coming up slow for 6 seconds, and then he's coming down slow for 6 seconds, and I'm just looking at him like, ugh. This is why you need to show up every day. This is why you need to pay attention at the beginning of the lift when I explain all the lifts, explain how it's done, demonstrate it, blah, blah, blah. You know, and the other guys are looking at him like, dude, what are you doing? Like, did you not pay attention to coach in the beginning? But, you know, I just talked to him and just, hey, I want you to come up fast. We want you to come down slow. All right. So it just always, even if you've been doing it for 3 weeks and all year long, still, you just always got to re-implement those basics and demonstrate it, explain to the guys, show them, tell them, because you can have some guys who, you know, if you're at my level, Division III, you never know when they're going to show up. And then we don't know how some guys are, even though when you're talking and you're demonstrating, some guys just are on their own stuff, not paying attention, looking around, you know. So that's kind of stuff you just kind of also got to look for. I know with eccentrics, as far as implementing the weight room as well, how you want to coach it up, that varies based off what your more personal philosophy is and what you're comfortable with. You know, if you got multiple coaches, that helps. Because at that point, you can have one coach on the stopwatch, or everyone on the stopwatch as you go around and coach guys up, or you can have the guys kind of do the honor system and hold each other accountable. Counting a guy down as you're going around and coaching guys up, you know, or if you're just by yourself, then you can have the stopwatch yourself and count the guys down. You know, I prefer to, you know, have the guys just do it on themselves because I don't, you know, it's just me. I don't have any other coach help me out really. So I prefer just to have the guys do it. I know when I do that though, and I ask for 6 seconds, I'm gonna get 4 seconds, you know. I'm gonna get 5 seconds. All right. I asked for 3 seconds. I'm gonna get 2 seconds. I'm gonna get 1 second. But you know, it's a kind of give and take relationship because I still want to be able to coach guys up. All right. I don't want to just spend the whole time sitting there counting, you know, to 6 or counting down from 6 or whatever it is, and not be able to correct the technique on a guy or correct a form or correct something. So it's just a little give and take. But you know, I'm still like a hawk, and when you see a guy's not honoring the count, you know, you got to remind him, and you got to, you know, find the partner, hold him accountable. If you got stopwatches, you know, we do have some. We pass them out, and I'll let guys, if they have their own stopwatch, they're using all their stopwatch, stuff like that. So, but you'll be surprised when you go from a stopwatch to an actual verbal count. Guys are like, "No, coach, no, man, that wasn't 6 seconds. You know, that was too long. That was like 10 seconds." I was like, "No, there's a stopwatch. Compared to when you're counting it down. If you're counting it down, they're gonna go so much faster." So, that's just kind of ways to implement and do it. But again, just do what you're comfortable with, what fits you. So ways to implement it throughout the phases and the training cycle. So it's best, as I said earlier, major muscle groups. All right, that's the best bang for the buck. Now you can implement it with the smaller muscle groups, but you really want to hit those major muscle groups first. Depending on how many days a week you're lifting, 1 to 2 days a week with eccentrics, because again, you got to remember that high stress. You know, if you're doing eccentrics 3 times a week, I don't know if your body's going to recover fast enough for the next training session. So 1 to 2 days a week, those fit great for, you know, 4-day cycles and 3 days and even 2 days. We'll break those down here on the next slide as well. Block phases. Now you can do more than this, and that's fine. 2 to 3 block phases. I know people that like to do 4 weeks or 5 or 6 weeks, and you could do that more. Me personally, this is just my philosophy. I like to continually change the stress that's getting placed upon the body. But we'll typically always go 3 weeks when we do this. But I don't like going to 4, 5, or 6 weeks because with the athletes, for them, it kind of gets boring and stagnant. And they're like, you know, I'm tired of doing this. I'm going to do something else. But then on the body, you know, I want to move on to those isometrics and the concentrics and the power stuff. To keep changing that stress upon the body. 2 to 4 phases a year. We're usually always going to be in that 4-phase type, and that's because of this next one right here, the residual effects. So if I train for 3 or 4 weeks. I have all these benefits that I've gotten from all this training, the adaptations. Well, now I know I'm going to have essentially about 4 weeks or so, give or take a couple days, before I really need to come back and reintroduce that stress. So that allows me to start hitting those isometrics and the power stuff before I need to come back and lose those benefits. So we'll move on to our other stuff and then come back for a week and re-implement those eccentrics, so they can kind of maintain those benefits throughout the years. And I've talked about that high amount of stress that eccentric places upon the body. One way to kind of limit that, to at least kind of reduce that great amount of stress, is the repeated bout effect. And what that is essentially is, let's say next week we're going to start our eccentric phase. So I want to implement one set of eccentrics the week before you actually start that eccentric phase. So an example, if I'm doing 3 sets of bench press here this week at, let's say, 80%, those first 2 sets, hey, I want to do my bench press. I want to work at that intensity that I'm working on. But then that last set, again, I want to reduce the intensity, so drop down to about 56% of the normal load, and then do 1 set of eccentrics just to introduce it to the body, to start to build a little bit of adaptation. So that's what the repeated bout effect is. That's a way to try to reduce that amount of DOMs the guy's going to get that next week, just because the body has a little bit of chance to slowly adapt to it a little bit before being introduced to it fully. All right, so this graph here, again, like I said, I'm a triphasic guy. I was just always into eccentrics and isometrics, that stuff, before I even knew what triphasic was, before I even read the book. But I obviously love Cal Dietz and triphasic, but you may not be a triphasic person, that's fine. You may like it, it may not work for you, but I feel it works for me and what we do. We do, even as we do the triphasic stuff, there are some things that I slightly change or do slightly different. It just works for me and works for what we have here at Manchester. But I'll also, as we talk about implementing eccentrics, I'll have other slides of how to implement it outside of triphasic model. That's not the triphasic model, okay? So here you see the intensities, the loads here, 55 to 85%. There you can go up to 87.5% as well. You see the seconds for each one, 5 to 6 seconds when you're above that 80%. And then anything below that 80% is 6 to 8 seconds, all right? And then the rep range, so the higher the intensity, you notice the lower and lower the sets and the reps are gonna be as you're doing the eccentrics. There are no eccentrics applied when he gets to that 55% or below. There are no eccentrics applied. He doesn't apply eccentrics, and the reason for that is it's just that amount of stress isn't that much to really get a great adaptation. So that's why he doesn't really play with eccentrics when he gets that 55% or below model. And now we'll kind of break this down into a 4-day, 3-day, and a 2-day model. So here, so this would be a 4-day model of eccentrics. So the top one, so it's a 4-day split, 2 days upper body, 2 days lower body. So day 1, lower body, day 2, upper body, day 3, lower body, day 4, upper body. So day 1, it could be anywhere from 82.5% to 87.5%. And eccentrics, you're doing eccentrics that day. Now, if you're like ways to kind of implement it, if you're doing like a 3-week phase or something like that, week 1, you could play at 82.5%. Week 2, you could progress to 85%. Week 3, go 87.5%, or you could kind of give them a little 5% buffer zone to play with right there, from like 82.5 to 87.5, or 85 to 87, just depending on how you want to play with it. But with our guys, I'll always give my guys a 5% buffer zone. So I'm like, hey, if you feel like you can't handle that 82.5%, or you picked it up and you thought it was too much, hey, lower it. You want to go at 77.5%, I'm fine with that. Same thing when we get higher. If they feel that 87.5% was too light, and they feel like, coach, man, I'm good. I think I can handle a little bit more, huh? You know, you want to push yourself? You know, you got a 5% buffer zone each way. Every athlete's different. You know, they recover differently than other guys. So I kind of let them have some ownership there and how they're training and working. So day 2 is upper body, same percentage frame, 82.5 to 87.5% eccentrically. Now day 3 and day 4, there are no eccentrics trained on those days. These are low volume days, and it is go big or go home. All right, squats and stuff like that. 92.5% to 97.5%, and typically these are singles for the most part, all the way through. So that's a 4-day model, and with those eccentrics on day 1 and 2, as you saw from that previous slide, the volume's still pretty low. Again, that's anywhere from 1 to 4 reps. He's not really doing anything high. Day 3, or 3-day model here, all 3 days are total body exercises. All 3 days are total body. All right. Eccentrics are implied on day 1 and day 3. There are no eccentrics on day 2. So day 1, again, you have that 82.5 to 87.5%. And you got your eccentrics. For us, we'll front squat on that day. We'll do dumbbell stuff. Day 2, if we're gonna, I got people here joining in as I'm going along. So if I pause, I'm inviting people in and stuff like that. So that day 2 again that's your go big or go home day. Again, squats, deadlifts. We're typically inclined, but no eccentrics. Day 3, that's more of his volume day. That would be the higher volume day, a little bit more reps, a little bit more sets. But even as he implements a little bit more volume, he's not jumping from 3 reps to 8 reps or anything like that. He's just only adding a couple more reps. But it's typically about 75 to 80%. I know when I start, here's something I do a little different. I may get some more volume and stuff like that and do a little bit more reps. I may go 70%, 65%, stuff like that. Because again, some of our guys who haven't been showing up for a long time, last thing I want to do is start them on a high intensity if they're not ready for it, especially eccentrically and all the extra volume. So, but same thing, I'll give that guy some buffer zone to play with on the intensities there. Day 2, or if you're doing a 2-day model, this is more type of an in-season type stuff. Day 1 is your total body, 82.5%, 87.5%. Eccentrics are trained those days. Day 2s are lower body. Again, it's your go big or go home, no eccentrics, low volume stuff, high intensity, 92.5 to 97.5%. Now, what I just do differently again is I will do total body on both those days because I'll do some upper body. I just don't like training upper body once a week. So I'll implement an exercise here and there as well. So that's just how I just slightly modify it based off his triphasic model. All right, so this is ways to implement eccentric training outside of triphasic. All right, that's not part of triphasic. So your basic eccentric emphasis, 3 to 4 second eccentric. So again, lowering, and then we want to follow that with a 1 second contraction. If you can get it up faster than a second, that's even better. All right, so always follow that eccentric with an explosive concentric contraction. All right. The super maximals here, so 105 to 125%. As I said, I did read one study said that they've done up to 130%. Make sure if you're going to do this that again that you're locked in, that the spotter's locked in, that the guys are paying attention and focused. Because that's a lot of intensity, that's a lot of weight. Last thing you want is injury, but there are some big gains you could get. One of the coaches that I've worked with that I admire is a great man. Strength coach for track down at Florida State University, Coach Meyer. I know he was telling me about his phase of doing super maximals down there with the track team and the gains that they're getting. So we haven't done it a lot here at Manchester, to be honest, because I've never worked with it in the past. And then this year, actually, we just started to do it. We've been working eccentrics for a while now, and I felt, to change it up, and I felt our guys have been consistent enough that okay, let's try it. Let's try it out and see how it goes. And so as we started a super maximal phase, we got 1 week into it, and then COVID-19 hit, and we haven't been in a weight room since spring break. So at least here on campus. So, but I know in the future that's something I'm going to start doing a little bit more of now that I've done some more research on it, and I feel comfortable with it, especially with our guys because we've trained essentially so much that to change it up, change that stress, and try to get those big gains. All right, but again, with that, you gotta attention to detail. You gotta be locked in, communicating, and we'll just worry about those injuries. That's something you gotta be cautious about. So the 2 up, 1 down method. There's 2 ways to do that. You got the alternating method. You got the same side method. Now this is limited on the exercises, the type of exercises you could do, but it's gonna be lower intensity. Again, 40 to 50%. So an example of this would be an example of the alternating method would be like a leg press. All right. So I'm gonna come down on my right leg, press up on both legs. All right. Come down on the left leg, press up with both legs. That would be an example of the alternating method. The same side method would be come down on the right leg, press up on the right leg. Come down on the right leg, press up on the right leg. Come down on the right leg, press up on the right leg. And then obviously now you got to do the same thing here on the left side. So as you can see with it, you're kind of limited on the exercise that you could do with it based off equipment. Now it can be, depending on how many reps that you're doing, it can be really, really time consuming, obviously. So you got to really pay attention to how you're setting up the workout and structuring based off your time frame to get the lift in. And that's the presentation. Here are my references. There's my contact information. Again, obviously you guys have some of my information from emailing you, from flyers and everything like that. But there's my information. There's my personal email as well, the millsville.ramos@gmail.com. And there's obviously my Manchester email. There's my cell phone number. There's my Twitter. I love talking shop. I love talking eccentrics, isometrics, or anything else, speed training, stuff like that, Olympics, lifts, and all that jazz. I love all that stuff. I am also a football coach here at Manchester, but I'm not just a football coach. Again, I was a strength coach at Division I level for 3.5 years. I worked with tennis, track and field. I love track and field. That's my second passion outside of football. Obviously helped out with football, assisted with swimming, and worked with field hockey, and worked with baseball here a little bit. So I've worked with a lot of various sports. So if you want to talk shop about eccentrics, feel free to reach out to me. Feel free to reach out to me about anything else if you want to talk. I'm always up for it. I usually check my email every day, so I'll get back to you. So see if you got any questions, feel free to type it out in the chat. I'll scroll through it to see if there's anything I missed. Oh, got someone coming in. All right, if there are no questions, I saw Coach Phillips, saw he logged in, he's in here. So Coach, whenever you're ready to go, the floor is yours.
It's not working.